This fall has been an embarrassment of riches for gamers with a hunger for alien bloodshed. PlayStation 3 owners can bloody their hands with Chimeran flesh, while Xbox 360 owners can gorge themselves on a trail of dead locusts. Choosing which game to go with can be tricky. Let's take a look at each game's relative strengths and weaknesses to help you make the right choice. When it was first announced, lead designer Cliff Bleszinski promised Gears of War 2 would be bigger, better, and more badass indeed. On the size front, there's no denying that Gears 2 is bigger than its predecessor. The story mode has been beefed up with a lot more emphasis on variety and pacing. Just when you're worried about things getting too monotonous, there'll be a turret sequence, a vehicle level, or some clever new worm artery that needs chainsawing. Being able to play the whole story in co-op with a friend helps make things even better. In contrast, the single-player campaign in Resistance 2 can feel pretty repetitive. Where the first game was a scripted and mostly linear shooter, liberally applied with narration, the sequel leaves the storytelling to some scattered intel documents that you may or may not find. The levels are bigger, and there's a greater variety of enemies, but lacking the explicit narrative thread, the game often feels like an empty push from arena shootout to arena shootout. If you're looking for the more rewarding single-player experience, Gears of War 2 is the game to go with. If you're more interested in the multiplayer experience, then Resistance 2 has got Gears beat on most counts. The game includes an entirely separate co-op campaign for up to 8 players. This is a shorter mode than the main single-player game, but it's fantastically rewarding, using a strategic mix of classes that harkens back to last year's Team Fortress 2. You'll need to carefully coordinate with all the different classes on your squad and play strategically to get through some of the mode's toughest sequences. It's extremely rewarding when you're playing well and advancing in tandem with 7 other players. The competitive multiplayer in Resistance 2 supports an unprecedented 60 players, which is unheard of in a console game. The multiplayer maps are huge and based on branching objective points that you'll tackle in smaller squads. This helps to keep the mode from devolving into a chaotic scrum. With a leveling up system that parallels Call of Duty 4's addictive XP framework, Resistance 2 is a totally convincing multiplayer game. There's a lot of fun to be had in Gears 2 multiplayer. The all-new Horde mode that has 4 players facing wave after wave of Locust attackers is simple but addictive. The traditional multiplayer mode makes a return as well, with 10 new maps, 5 remade maps from the first game, and a new matchmaking system to make joining games easier. Gears 2 multiplayer offers fun and relatively traditional 5-on-5 action. If you enjoyed the first game, you'll appreciate the new maps and matchmaking, but it can't really compete with Resistance 2's sprawling and terrifically varied multiplayer option. So which of these shooters deserves your money? Even with its comparatively weak single-player campaign, it's hard to beat Resistance 2. There isn't any other shooter on consoles that can match the terrific 8-player co-op mode. The sprawling 60-person multiplayer mode is tactically rich and genuinely rewarding to play. Gears 2 has a better single-player mode, but it's far from the best single-player shooter released this year. The multiplayer is fun, but it's simple and not nearly as deep or comprehensive as Resistance 2's. If you can only afford to exterminate one alien race this year, choose Resistance 2.